I'm here to impart some of my observations as a CRI research fellow over the last 3 years, looking in some detail at the Football Association experience of elite athletes. Now, this is the largest elite program for screening junior athletes in the UK, in England and Wales, and it encompasses all 4 leagues and 92 clubs and at academy level. And that encompasses every 16-year-old who signs a scholar contract for a club, and they're mandated by the FA, and it's funded by the PFA, the Professional Footballers Association, so their union equivalent, to undergo a health questionnaire and family evaluation, a 12-lead ECG, and, importantly, an echocardiogram. This not only applies to 16-year-olds at club level, but also to those representing England, and whoever puts on an international jersey to participate in such a competition is also mandated to undergo a screening with ECG and echocardiography, be it for a women's team, a youth team ranging now as young as 14 years old, or disability teams as well. Now, there have been an increasing number of screens performed over the last 2 decades since the inception of this programme in 1996. And that's because of more investment in grassroots level, there are more participants at academy level, and more representatives at international level as well. And what we did was look at over 11,000 of such individuals dating back to 2002, from when there was robust data available for us, and took a cut-off point for the end of 2016. And the majority of these athletes who'd undergone ECG and echocardiography were male, although there was a substantial proportion of females as well, nearly 600 females. And the vast majority were given the all-clear after initial evaluation with an ECG and echocardiogram. And from the small proportion, approximately 5%, that did undergo further evaluation, half were deemed all-clear, and half to be kept for further surveillance. But if we look at the pathologies that were identified from this large screening program, we can see that there were 5 cases of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy initially detected, 2 cases of ARVC, 1 of DCM, 3 of long QT syndrome, 26 of Wall-Parkinson-White, 2 anomalous coronary artery origins that were detected, and 3 hemodynamically significant bicuspid aortic valve cases. And that led to an overall prevalence of 0.38%, and the sensitivity of the ECG being the best at detecting the conditions. And I suppose such a screening program has the added advantage of echocardiography being used routinely. And the ECG didn't, for example, pick up 1 case of ARVC, but that was subsequently detected on echocardiography, 2 cases of anomalous coronary arteries, as expected with a normal ECG, and even the 3 cases of bicuspid aortic valve disease with hemodynamic compromise was not detected by the ECG alone, but subsequently detected by echocardiography. And the sensitivity of the echocardiography was low because the majority of the conditions you can see there are electrical with a structurally normal heart. And reviewing the data of similarly aged screening programs, the prevalence of the pathology detected from this particular screening program is in keeping with that in the literature, ranging from 0.2 to 0.7%, with conditions predisposing to sudden cardiac death. Of course, given that we did have the benefit of subjecting each individual to an echocardiogram, there were a variety of valvular pathologies also detected, encompassing congenital septal and valvular defects, which constituted about 2% of the overall cohort, leading to, with the major pathology, a prevalence of 2.4%. But of course, no test is foolproof, even if you do perform an echocardiogram, and there are high-profile cases, particularly within football, and in today's day and age of technology and media profile and social media, these events are highly emotive and well-publicized. We did have the advantage of being able to actually follow up an endpoint of sudden cardiac death over this time period. And that was done through post-mortem reports, and the initial deaths were identified from an FA registry that was being kept, and also from actually writing to each club. And we did rely on the retrospective recall of the club doctors, and also media reports as well. But the FA do keep a registry of such data. And we were able to look at over 118,000 athlete years and follow this up over a mean period of 10.5 years. And we identified 23 deaths. The majority are symbolized by the red slice of the pie chart that were due to cardiac pathology. And that actually equates to 8 cardiac deaths that were verified on post-mortem report and death certification. So we went back and looked at the initial screens at the age of 16 for these individuals. And what we found was 2 of these deaths actually were highlighted as hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, but the individuals then continued to play of their own volition. So they were correctly identified. However, that did leave 6 other cases, and on review of their ECG and echocardiogram, they had correctly been cleared as fit to train and play, i.e. they had a normal ECG and echocardiogram at the age of 16, and therefore they would be deemed false negatives. And looking at these 6 individuals in particular, as highlighted in the far right column with a negative in red, we can see that the vast majority, and even those highlighted in green that were identified with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, were due to some form of cardiomyopathy, be it idiopathic left ventricular hypertrophy or ARVC, that we do know has a propensity now to worsen with exercise and unmask a phenotype. There was one case, however, of SADS that was identified after further evaluation of first-degree relatives as well. But it's important to note that the time between screening and sudden death was nearly 7 years, and the mean age of sudden cardiac death was about 23.5 years. We were able then to calculate a rough incidence of sudden cardiac disease as a minimum estimate based on the number of athlete years and the number of sudden cardiac deaths. And that pertained to about 1 in 14,800 athlete years. And I'd like to also highlight the ethnic differences. And one can see that actually black athletes were 7 times more likely to suffer a sudden cardiac death than white athletes. So out of the 8 deaths that did occur, half of them were black, albeit with a much smaller denominator. There is data across the pond, led by Kimberly Harmon, in a much larger study with over 4 million athlete years, and they looked at their NCAA high school athletes, and they did identify an incidence of 1 in over 50,000 athlete years. But a common trend, and all these athletes were subject to just their 14-point questionnaire, health questionnaire and physical examination only, but they did have some common features in that most of their cases, all our cases were male, and sudden cardiac death was as high as 1 in 5,000 male basketball players. And there are similarities drawn between the dynamic adrenergic surges and that start-stop mechanism involved in basketball in the USA, with similar sorts of movements here in football over in the UK. And this was also in black basketball players as well. So there was that similarity with that particular study. But it's important to note the age-related penetrance of cardiomyopathies and how long the mean time was of 7 years between the sudden cardiac arrest and the initial screen. ECG abnormalities are known to precede echo manifestations of disease, and as such, the current FA recommendations have now extended not only for a history, ECG, and echocardiogram at the age of 16, but also to take an ECG at the age of 18 and 20 in order to try and detect any further ECG, mild perhaps, electrical manifestations of an early cardiomyopathy. And also, in line with their national recommendations, where every 14-year-old who puts on an England jersey is screened, they're actually going along even with the CRI lower age limit of screening 14-year-olds with an ECG only, and also extending the upper limit to an ECG at the age of 25. But of course, anyone who does have an abnormality detected should undergo annual, at least, surveillance, or it depends on the type of pathology that is detected. So in conclusion, the prevalence of serious cardiac disorders from this cardiac screening program, which is the largest, one of the largest certainly in Europe, and in the UK that mandates ECG and echocardiogram, is 0.4%, the majority of which were electrical faults in origin. The false negative screens were primarily attributed to cardiomyopathy, and athletes should be assessed intermittently throughout their career, irrespective of their level of playing, especially given the high incidence of sudden cardiac death in screened individuals, particularly so in black footballers. And to help take this forward, a national registry, a formalisation of the FA registry, but in collaboration with other sporting organisations and charitable organisations in the UK, would be very helpful to acquire a more accurate denominator and numerator in order to estimate the true impact of sudden cardiac death in athletes. Thanks very much for your attention.